Hello, I'm Phil Smith, and I just want to talk about something that's been bothering me for a while. Now, a lot of people all over the place have been talking about a lot of the problems with Disney, like with Star Wars, with Marvel, with the damn remakes and all that crap. But I want to go back to something the majority of people have been completely ignoring and forgetting about. What was once, and still is honestly, the heart and soul of what Disney as I guess a company used to be before they killed it, and that was hand-drawn animation. Now I know a lot of people are getting a lot of excuses about, oh, hand-drawn animation cost too much money and it wasn't doing well and blah 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 blah. It's a steaming pile of bullshit. Just to put things in perspective, here's something you have to understand: animation has always had difficulty being successful. Even Disney, even back in the past, had its problems with this. Pinocchio, Fantasia, Bambi, Dumbo, all these films failed to get proper money when they were originally released, and it's only due to re-releases that they eventually gained success. Many of what's considered classic hand-drawn made films basically were only successful because of constant re-releases, because they didn't do well originally. Later films like Alice in Wonderland is the same way. It didn't do well originally at the box office. So using box office results as a way to judge the animated films like that is total bullshit. And a lot of people ignore the fact that Lilo and Stitch, which came out just like 2, maybe 3 years at most before they first stopped doing hand drawn animation altogether, Lilo and Stitch was actually a commercial success when it was originally released. Yeah, it wasn't like a blockbuster amount of money here, but it at least made back more than what it cost to make the film itself, and was an actual success in of itself. And it really proved that hand animation could still continue in the 21st century. And then just a few years later, they axed the whole thing. And the reason really is this: first, you have to put this in perspective, and you have to look into the history, and you find out that Disney Corp has been wanting to get rid of hand animation since Walt died. If it was not for the success of the Jungle Book, the original animated film, hand animation altogether would have died then. And in many times, they suffered the same sort of fate happening again and again with the near threat of being axed by the corporate heads. Another good example is just before the Renaissance started, all the animators that were in this animation studio that was built by Walt were literally kicked out and put in like a few trailers, etc., something along those lines. And again, the threat of near extinction happened. So there was always that wavering line. They just needed the corporate heads only needed a lousy excuse to get away with it, and they basically found it with two things. One, The Lion King. Now, with the success of Lion King came impossible demands by the corporate heads. They wanted the same exact money for The Lion King with every future animated film, which, no matter how great the animated film is going to be, even if it was a classic, there's no way that can happen. Throughout any animation studio, up until CG animation created this, this formula that can be manipulated and copied over and over again that can gain the same amount of audience no matter what. Up until then, animation was always going to be a risk. You didn't know if it was going to be successful or not. Half the time you make a classic and then it would fail on its release, and it would take years later until it was realized to be a great film. Iron Giant, another great example of this. So of course, this impossible demand to maintain at least the same amount, if not more so, money after the success of Lion King, which the Lion King only got that amount of success money wise because of the success of all the previous animated films before it. And they also ignore the fact that it took years of development until they reached that point with the Lion King. There was a really floundering point of animation. The only time where animation would only time animation could have, there's one time the corporate heads could have actually axed animation, hand drawn animation altogether, because the quality was truly suffering and waning. And that was generally right after Walt died, throughout majority of 60s, 70s, and early mid-ish 80s, up until basically Who Framed Roger Rabbit started what's now known as the Renaissance. And that period was a real suffering point of animation. Many of the anime films at that time were really kind of shit. I mean, there were a few good films, like there was Robin Hood, which was pretty good, and Fox and the Hound, that was pretty good. And then, of course, there was also The Great Mouse Detective, and probably a few others. But the majority of the films were either crap, like Black Cauldron, or just very meh, like the Aristocats and the in like what was it, the the one with the mice and the alligator, I forget the name of it, The Rescuers. So animation at the time really suffered, and I wouldn't want animation to be dropped at that time, mind you. I'm just saying that if there was ever a time to justify the quality of the film's suffering, was around then. But the animators eventually found their way, they got their feet set, and they slowly but surely got back on track. And the thing is, what's really annoying is people keep giving the excuses like many of the hand-drawn animated films that came out in the 21st century were bad, when that's just not the case. Unless you're like talking about Home on the Range or a good portion of Brother Bear, because the middle of that movie really suffers. The rest of the animated films that have been hand drawn that have come out in the 21st century have been at the very least good movies, if not even better than they've been recognized as. Emperor's New Groove is a fantastic, basically like Looney Tunes style comedy animated film, which is very hilarious, very fantastic as an animated movie. Atlantis Lost Empire is a bloody fantastic sci-fi action adventure family film with a little pinch of steampunk rolled in. Treasure Planet is the ultimate best steampunk movie in the history of steampunk movies. Like, it is such a great steampunk movie. Lilo and Stitch, as I already mentioned, was a successful release and was a great film in terms of like the family drama aspects, and it did moderately well with the like ET elements, if you will. And the later films that came out, like with Winnie and Pooh and Princess and the Frog, although neither of those films were perfect by any means, they were still moderately good movies that really showed that the animators still had more to give to animation. And the thing that makes the situation even more frustrating was animators even proved their worth with some of the shorts they created. You see, before the whole fiasco of Disney dumping hand-drawn animation altogether because they weren't getting the crazy loads of money and success that they wanted, and Pixar was finally able to keep a constant, steady stream of money, which made everyone be okay with keeping Pixar around, which is honestly the only reason Pixar stayed consistently successful. It's not because Pixar was necessarily better, it's just that Pixar was able to keep a monetary amount of money because they kind of were always in flux with what would eventually be the constant formula that every CGI animated film have. The CGI animated formula, of course, is riding on a popular trend like the internet or like emojis or what have you, having an entire cast of somewhat successful, already well-known actors, actresses, having the film be quasi comedy slash action. Let's see, what else is there? And also the fact that all the animated films from all the studios, whether it's like Pixar or DreamWorks or Illumination or whatever, they have the exact same style of animation. Plus, they generally have, especially nowadays, this sort of like pop song aesthetic, and that comedy has to be kind of crude, but not crude enough to be offensive. And obviously, also, there's a lot of rehash of older elements, like the Roots was a rehash of the Flintstones, or the Troll one. Yeah, the Trolls were a rehash of the Smurfs, etc. But in the modern CGI aesthetic that's been repeated over and over and over and over, it's really baffling to me. I mean, even the princess formula that people go on, like, first off, the fairy tale princess formula that Disney used to have, that ended with Princess and the Frog. Ever since Tangled, it's just the CGI formula, or as I like to call it, the Shrekula, since Shrek kind of started this. Lindsay Ellis kind of actually discussed this a lot better in that one video. I forget the name of it. I'll try and find it and put a link in the description. Anyways, I'm getting off topic, aren't I? Anyways, getting back on point. Another point also made when it comes to hand-drawn animation is that before the whole fiasco of Disney Corp dumping hand-drawn animation, there were plans in the works to create another Fantasia film. Now, 4 shorts were eventually created for the film. El Destino, The Little Match Girl, what was the other one? Little Match Girl, damn, I forget the name of it. There's one with a cat and one with they're in Africa and they're flying kites. I forget the name of them. I'll try to look up the names of them online elsewhere. But anyways, go and actually watch those shorts, and you see that Disney animators were still on top of things insanely. El Destino, which was this beautiful animation, basically taken from what was almost planned as a cartoon short with Salvador Dali, the artist, and Disney, was eventually made years later, El Destino. And it was such a good animated film. that actually was successful enough that the Salvador Dali Museum was like, hey, this is lit. Can we actually show this in our museum? Can we also show the artwork from the animation of this film? And also, they actually got to show this to many people in I believe it was Spain. It was a country where that museum was at, and even like a lot of people, like the president of Spain or what have you, said it was great. And it's just great proof right there that hand drawn animation still had much quality left as a medium. So the excuses getting rid of it is pretty absurd, especially if you actually go and watch a lot of these movies. You know, and also another thing a lot of people ignore is the reason why many of these films suffered. The later films suffered not because they were bad movies, but oftentimes because of horrible release dates, or because of, or it's because they were actually given terrible promotion. Take Last Lost Empire. This was a film that was actually promoted as an adult animated movie. Now, why in the hell was a family hand drawn animated Disney film promoted as an adult animated movie? I don't know, but it was a terrible thing. It was a terrible promotion in the worst sense, because it got rid of many kids from watching the movie and made a lot of adults watch the movie, and then the adults bitch that they weren't given what they wanted from the promotion, even though that's not what the film was even about. Um, it was just a fiasco. And the same thing happened with Treasure Planet. Here you have basically a steampunk film that was unfortunately promoted as a sci-fi film when it's steampunk. And once you accept that it's steampunking and criticize it in the context of it being steampunk, there's not really anything to criticize. I'll grant, at least with Treasure Planet, the robot sidekick is a little annoying, but he only comes in like the last third of the movie, and he doesn't destroy any of the great elements of the story and characters that the rest of the film has. And everything else is just so bloody good. It's just criminal that this film is so underappreciated, underrated. And the thing also you have to understand is a lot of these films, I believe, honestly could be successful now if they had proper re-releases. Again, a lot of the reason why a lot of underappreciated, underselling, classic Disney movies eventually gained their notoriety, if you will, was because they got plenty of re-releases in theaters, whether it was Alice in Wonderland or Pinocchio or what have you. Nowadays, they hardly ever re-release any movies, and when they do, it's already the established successful animated movies anyhow. So that's another reason why a lot of hand-drawn made films don't generally garner the amount of success that they could be garnering, because they hardly get any re-promotion, they hardly get talked about, they hardly even get fair criticism, often criticized for things that is unfair because, again, terrible promotion. Another thing also is the terrible release dates. And Last Lost Empire was released right up against Shrek, which is terrible for so many reasons. You'd think Disney would have learned this lesson already, because they released The Great Mouse Detective up against American Tail. That didn't end up well. They released Oliver and Company up against, what was it, Land Before Time. That didn't do well. They released Ants up against basically A Bug's Life. That didn't do well. And that last one I just mentioned, that happened like maybe like 5 or so years ago. Yeah, it wasn't no more than like 5 years, probably less. So it didn't, so the whole reason why they would release this film up against an animated film that's in a fairy tale format, which has been moderately already known as a sort of success for animation, mostly, and what most animated films up to that time were known for, it was really absurd. The whole notion of not only this terrible promotion as this children's family animated film being released as an adult film when it's not, but the fact that they would give it such a terrible release date up against another animated film. And even worse is Treasure Planet, which hardly got any good promotion whatsoever, and the promotion they got kept calling it a sci-fi film when it's steampunk. But on top of that whole fiasco is the fact that this film was released up against like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and I think even Spider-Man 2. There's no way in hell any animated film could ever garner such success, any success, with that level of competition. It's impossible. And that's the thing that a lot of people forget, is when there was a little revival of hand-drawn animation in the early mid-2000s, a lot of people were trying to say, well, these films weren't successful because they were hand-drawn made films. These films weren't successful, like with The Case of Princess Frog, because the whole race thing, which is honestly, no. Like, I'm not an expert on any of the race stuff, obviously. But I know the film isn't really bad. It's actually a pretty good movie, and it does at least address the racism aspect in some way, even if it's in a more subtle or fashion. And although it is subtle, it's understandable why it's subtle because it's trying to be a fairy tale first and foremost. Though I can see why some people would take issue with it, understandably. But it's not as bad as it could have been, and it was a lot better than people give credit for. And a lot of people keep forgetting in the case of Princess and the Frog is what it was up against. The, Princess and the Frog was released at the exact same time as Avatar. Now I know what you're gonna say. Avatar's not like a pop culture blah blah. That doesn't fucking matter. Avatar was like a moth to the flame for everyone. It was a film directed by James Cameron. It was already a big success director person, and on top of that, on top of that, Avatar came out years and years after like James Cameron's last film, which was like Titanic, which was in the '90s. So we've already got that, which was enough of a moth to the flame. But on top of that, there was the CGI spectacle, which also made this just a huge moth to the flame film. It didn't matter if the film was good or not. You already had the spectacle special effects and James Cameron's direction, and that was just enough to drag everyone in. Like I said, moth to a flame. And in the process, Princess and the Frog suffered drastically because it was released at the exact same time as that. And what's also annoying is the fact that they ignored that the same thing happened just a few years later when they released the last like hand-drawn animated Winnie the Pooh movie. That film actually came up against fucking Harry Potter. And mind you, both these films didn't really have much, if any, animation. And it seems even more strange that in the case with the Princess and the Frog, that there wasn't more support for that movie because of the race thing, more so than say Black Panther. And it's even more absurd that they would drop hand animation because it isn't doing well successfully when Star Wars is suffering 10 times worse at this point than what hand animation was suffering at the times when it was kicked out. It just, if you really look into it, you realize just Disney wanted to dump hand animation since the beginning. And honestly, the success of Pixar and the impossible demands of having every animated film have at least the same amount of money as Lion King led to the dumping of hand animation, which honestly is hypocritical. And honestly, at this point, we need some good hand drawn animated movies. All the animated films, for the most part, are CGI animation. Yes, we do get a few good stop motion films every once in a while, which is good. But mind you, the only reason stop motion has any moderate success is all because of Burton. Because of The Nightmare Before Christmas, it led to the quasi success of stop motion films. Even Laika was literally in co-production when they were making Corpse Bride. On top of that, or something along those lines. On top of that, Laika's first two films are kind of knockoff Burton-like films, which led to their success. Even the first film, I forget the name of it. It was directed by the same guy who did Nightmare Before Christmas. I forget his name. Coraline. The film was Coraline, though. But yeah, I'm getting off topic. But yeah, what I'm trying to say here is that hand-drawn animation got the short end of the stick. It was something that Disney corporate wanted to get rid of for years, and they finally got rid of it in the early 2000s, giving a lot of bullshit excuses when in reality they put possible demands on the animation studio, as well as having Pixar as well. And now, honestly, yeah, it's even more infuriating because hand animation is still so good that they would take the time and effort to constantly make live action remakes. Yeah, I digress. See you later.